at Universal Plaza, and we are about to interview Jake Schlack, who's running for Tigard City Council. So thank you for listening, and remember to become informed about your candidates and get out and vote. Agree with them. Jake, would you start by telling us just a little bit about your background for about a minute?
Of course, and thank you, Lisa, for having me. It's really a great opportunity to talk not just with you, but any voters who are going to be watching this as well, making some tough decisions in November. A little bit about me. My name is Jake Schlack. I'm running for Tigard City Council because I want to make Tigard a great place to run your business, walk your dog, and raise your kids. I've been on the Tigard City Council since July 1st, 2024. I was appointed onto a 6-month term in order to fill a vacancy that arose, and I'm on the ballot in November for a 4-year term. Before that, I served 2 terms as chair of the Tigard Budget Committee, which really taught me how to be an inclusive leader as well as champion fiscal stewardship as well with taxpayer dollars. And my top concerns as a candidate are making sure that we have safe streets, secure neighborhoods, addressing housing options, reducing homelessness, and making sure our library is well supported.
Could you quickly go over the boards and committees you were on and what the ones you are on now?
Yeah, so prior to my appointment to the City Council, I served on the Budget Committee, which is it's made up of city councilors and community members, and that we approve a $400 million city budget, largely full of capital improvement projects. And now as a city councilor, I have the opportunity to be a liaison for a number of boards, both at the community level and regionally as well. At the city level, I'm the liaison for the library board and the planning commission, and then there are some water-focused regional boards that I'm also liaison for as well in this role.
Okay, that sounds like a great background. Housing and homelessness have been priorities for both you and the city, county, state government. And as stated in your interview with Tigard Life, only 26% of Tigard residents find affordable housing good or excellent in Tigard. And another 28% of renters spend 50% or more of their income on housing, which is quite a bit.
Yes.
How do you plan to further work to secure affordable housing for Tigard residents? And what are some of your specific plans to do that?
Yeah, as a city councilor, affordable housing is one of my top concerns. I think it's something that affects people from all walks of life. It affects young people who are trying to get their start in life. It affects families who are trying to raise kids. It affects seniors who are trying to age in place, and many others. And it's a topic that I'm personally interested in because my partner and I we're long-time renters and worked hard to become first-time homeowners this year. So I understand how difficult it is for a lot of people who are renting and trying to jump into home ownership to make that jump in this current environment we have with depressed housing supply, rising interest rates, or high interest rates, I should say, and rising living costs. So for all those reasons, I'm really concerned about housing in Tigard. Now, in order to address this, I think what we need to do is incentivize the development of a larger quantity and greater variety of housing options in Tigard. And I think it's really important to emphasize the greater variety of housing options because it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. When I mention families who are trying to raise kids and seniors trying to age in place, they're going to have very different needs that we need to address, and we need to make sure they're accounted for when we're developing housing. Additionally, we need to review our zoning practices to see what options we have to redevelop and infill in Tigard as well as potentially expand. The fact of the matter is Tigard is a largely landlocked city. We are surrounded by municipalities on 3 sides, and on the western side we have the urban growth boundary. So we need to figure out how can we address this with the land we currently have. One of the other concerns I have when it comes to housing, you mentioned rents and so on, is preventing displacement. When I served on the Social Services Grant Program, we saw a large number of applicants that are focused on rent assistance, tenant assistance programs, and there's just a large need for that, I think, in our community and many other communities. So I want to make sure that the city continues to fund programs like that, as well as make sure that supporting housing service dollars through Metro are coming to Tigard and addressing community needs here. So those are some of my top priorities when it comes to housing, and it's going to be one of my top focuses if I'm returned to office.
You sound really enthusiastic about it, so that's great. A couple of follow-up questions. How do you incentivize voters to actually vote for the funding that's going to be needed for this affordable housing? I know Metro supplied some of it. And how do you, when you're dealing with homeless people going back into housing, how do you try to help them get into housing when sometimes they lack jobs or they lack experience? How do you actually transition them with roofs over their heads?
Sure. So, as far as affordability and how it impacts our unhoused community members, that's a really tough situation, and I think something that we need to sort of balance common sense measures on and with compassion as well. It's also tough, I think, to make any sort of funding requests right now just because of where cost of living is for a lot of people. So the first thing I would want to do is look at the dollars that we currently have at our disposal in, say, our general fund or with other funding sources that we currently have, like I mentioned, supporting housing services funding, to see how we can use those currently before we make any additional asks of community residents. I also think we need to make sure that we are funding nonprofits that are focused on assisting people get into stable housing, because the fact of the matter is the city of Tigard's not really in a position to do that itself. Sometimes it's better to work with our community partners who are on the ground, who have relationships with people in those situations and are able to provide more immediate assistance than the city of Tigard could if we were going to create, for instance, a government program to address it.
How do you fight the not in your backyard thing when the whole the new movement is yes in my backyard? How do you fight that?
Yeah, it's a tough situation and something that we've heard frequently at public comment during my time as a city councilor. I think, based on my background as a senior product analyst, one of the things I've really learned is how do we address customer use cases and how do we sort of get buy-in from stakeholders in order to not sell policies, but develop policies that work for everybody. And I think that's something we really need to do when it comes to addressing homelessness. I think there is a not in my backyard element. There's also a yes in my backyard element. And I think what's important is that we have transparent and open communication with our community members, so that way they have an opportunity to provide feedback and say their piece and be part of the process, rather than just feeling like we're foisting a solution on them that they were not part of. So I'm really big on making sure that we have community forums and opportunities to get community feedback, especially when it comes to homelessness.
Thanks. I'm going to go to a very relating question. Related to this meeting and balancing the needs of the homeless, the businesses, and the communities and residents. And how are you further planning to be sure that compassion for homeless residents, security and safety for neighbors and businesses and communities are met together?
Yeah, there's, when I talk with community members, residents and businesses and others, and I ask them what is their top concern, oftentimes homelessness is the top concern that is raised to me. And I can understand why. It's a really acute problem, not just in the city of Tigard, but just regionally. It's a big issue. And I always look at the homelessness crisis from sort of a moral perspective. It's, again, how do we address having a compassionate response to this crisis while also having common sense boundaries on what are acceptable behaviors in our community. Some of the work I've done, there's been a lot of work that I've jumped into as a city councilor, even starting on July 1st. One of the first things I did is support strengthening our time, place, and manner restrictions in the city of Tigard. What we ended up doing is having to end camping at Tigard Library because of risky behaviors that were on the rise, but also make sure that people who are camping overnight still have a place to go. So we're offering a space just down the road at Tigard Public Works, just down Hall Street as well. Another thing that I've been supportive of is piloting a safe parking program at City Hall. This is an opportunity for us to serve people who are living out of their cars, giving them a safe place to sleep overnight, while also helping them work with a case manager who is able to help them get on a stable path to housing as well. That's something that actually just launched last week that I've supported. So those are things that I'm working on there as far as housing goes for our unhoused community members. Regarding business concerns, residential concerns, I totally understand where people are coming from, and that's why as a budget committee member, one of the things that I was really passionate about supporting was investing in additional community-centered police officers, especially focused on downtown. There was a big concern among local business owners about unhoused residents or unhoused community members who were disrupting their business or making people feel unsafe. So we invested in having community-centered police officers who can build relationships with unhoused community members and help them direct them to the resources they need, while also building relationships with business owners so that way they can address safety concerns and business disruption concerns that they may have. So there's a lot of things that the city's currently working on that I support, and I think it's going to be important going forward to continue efforts like that, continue getting community buy-in, like I said, with community members, and also partnering with nonprofits who are able to provide more immediate services than the city may be able to.
One quick follow-up is when you're putting people into the library, into other places, and I think you mentioned how are other groups in the city also helping them to go from those other places like safe parking actually into a shelter? Because we all know that safe parking is better than camping on the street, but a lot of people don't have cars, and a lot of people don't get up with their kids. How do you specifically address that in a more immediate way?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as far as safe parking program, that's one of the reasons why I really support it, is because there's a big emphasis on getting people into stable housing, whatever that looks like for a particular person's situation, whether it's with family, whether it's transitional housing, whether it's shelter, and so on. So I think it's really important that we make sure that there's an emphasis on that sort of transitional element. Additionally, there are some transitional housing projects that I know of that are going on in Tigard currently that I think will be able to provide immediate assistance in getting people off the streets, but also be able to connect people with resources at that facility so that way they can get into more stable housing. At the end of the day, the homelessness crisis is a really tough situation, and it's an evolving situation, and it's something I think that we need to be responsive to and sort of see how things develop and how certain solutions work out before we sort of pause and assess and come up with new solutions. Unfortunately, it's not something we're going to be able to snap our fingers and fix overnight.
And just another follow-up, as you mentioned it, as a budget person, how did you work with funding for the police, and do we have enough police to do that, or do we need to hire more police, and what's the community feeling about that?
Yeah, so if I recall correctly, most of our funding for the police department does come out of our general fund, which is largely based on property tax dollars, service fees, intergovernmental charges, or funding sources as well. One of the things that I'm really happy about is that earlier this year we passed a public safety renewal levy, which will help provide dollars to support our police officers, including, I believe, 8 patrol officers and other officers as well, and other staff support. So that's an option that we found in order to help make sure that we have the personnel levels that we need. One of the interesting things I've learned from the budget committee from going from the budget committee to being on the city council is when you pass a budget, for some reason I was under the impression that just because you passed something with a bunch of measures, it was immediately there the next day. And as I've learned as a city councilor, that's not necessarily the case. So even though we can make we are able to make funding available, there's still always a lag time, of course, because we have to hire people that are able to assist with those matters.
Thank you. So next one, describe your work with the Social Service Grants Funding Committee. And you stated that you had done some reforms to make that program more effective. What impact has this had on social service delivery for Tigard, and what were some of the reforms you enacted?
Yeah, so as chair of the Tigard Budget Committee, one of the things I'm most proud of that we did, or that I helped with directly, was reforming our social service and community events grant programs. Before, we didn't really have a set of guidelines for how decisions were going to be made, and that led to inefficient decision making, and also I think it led to some inconsistent practices year over year for how dollars were allocated. My goal as chair of the Tigard Budget Committee, as part of a 3-member subcommittee, was to figure out how do we make this a more transparent and systematic process. That way it's fair for taxpayers, because of course the dollars are coming from taxpayer dollars, as well as fair for applicants so they understand how we're going to be making our decisions. What we ended up doing was a series of reforms. The first thing we did is we introduced funding priorities to clearly state up front, these are the types of things that we want to fund because these are the things that address our community, that will address our community needs the best. Things like hunger, things like education programs, housing and homelessness support, and other services as well. Second, we introduced a number of eligibility requirements in order to make sure that we were giving dollars to, we were giving funding to organizations that had a proven track record and were going to be able to deliver on what they were asking for funding for, And the final thing that we did is we introduced a scoring rubric in order to say these are the things that we really care about. We need to make sure that we're making decisions based on them. Things like alignment with our funding priorities that I mentioned earlier. Things like impact to the community. How many people in Tigard are they benefiting? Is it 2 people? Is it 20? Is it 200? And also things like financial responsibility. Getting a copy of financial statements to say, is this organization in good standing? So those are the types of things that we instituted in order to make the process more transparent, accessible, and systematic. And I'm really glad we did it, because this year we saw double the grant applicants and triple the funding requests that we had available. A lot of tough decisions had to be made on who would receive grants from the city of Tigard. And I think this process worked really well because at the end of the day, we did the scoring matrix. We did some calculations based on it. We looked at what the dollar amounts would be, and at the end of the day, the subcommittee responsible for making these proposals only at its discretion changed around 8% of dollars around, which I think was showed that our system was fair. It worked. It took a lot of the sort of individual decision making out of it. So I'm really proud about those reforms, and I look forward to seeing how they're implemented for future fiscal years.
So to sum up, you build some consistency and a lot of accountability into it.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's transparent so that way people who are applying can understand how we're making decisions, as well as taxpayers, they can understand why we're making the decisions that we're making with their money.
So the next one hits on a lot of things you've already hit on.
Yeah.
How are you working to assure diversity in housing, opportunities for small businesses, green spaces, and neighborhood cohesiveness are addressed with your work on the Planning Commission and any other plans for further downtown development?
Yeah, so I think land planning and community development are two of the big things that the city can do in order to really address quality of life, if you will. And there are a lot of considerations, like you mentioned, that we need to keep in mind. Business concerns, residential concerns, environmental concerns, traffic concerns are a big thing as well, especially in Tigard, where we have a lot of major roads coming through Tigard. So a lot of things to keep in mind when it comes to land planning. And if I'm reelected, there are going to be two really big projects that come up that involve land planning that whoever is elected will be able to have a voice in. One is River Terrace 2.0, which is a new development on the west side of town. We have River Terrace 1.0 currently, which is on either side of Roy Rogers. And the hope is that we're going to be able to expand further and add more commercial real estate as well as higher density residential housing, which will increase housing supply and help alleviate some of the housing problems that we talked about earlier. Another big one that I've already been able to provide feedback on as a city councilor is Downtown Reimagined. The hope is that we're going to be able to have a neighborhood-focused redevelopment of downtown Tigard, where we're at now, in order to make it more pedestrian-friendly, having more mixed-use roads for bike lanes, people who are walking, and so on, as well as mixed-use real estate, commercial real estate as well. Really sort of revitalize our downtown area. So those are going to be two big areas when it comes to land planning and community development in the next 4 years that any city councilor is going to deal with. And hopefully I'll be in a position to help guide those projects.
Well, it's nice because Tigard has a lot of downtown festivals and they have a lot of downtown art days. So
absolutely,
I think that's a wonderful thing about the city. The urban growth boundary, how do you manage not using it? I know that's Metro's part of that decision, but how do you manage trying to move it and yet keep, sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, I think I bring a really interesting perspective to the table when it comes to land development in that capacity, especially with River Terrace on the western side of Tigard. I was born and raised about 4 minutes from where I live now, 4 minutes from Roy Rogers Road, and so I grew up without Progress Ridge there. I remember when Barrows Road went on the West Side Regional Trail, and now it's on its current path. So I've seen that area really develop and grow, not just on the Tigard side, but on the Beaverton side as well. And part of me, and I said this at a meeting earlier this week, part of me is sort of sad to see things like some of the farmland go and sort of have a sense of nostalgia for it. But it's also amazing to see the development that's going in there and how the community is evolving and changing over time. I think when it comes to the urban growth boundary specifically, I support having an urban growth boundary on principle. I think it's important to make sure that we're really efficient with the land that we can currently develop before we try expanding out any further. And I also think it's important for just various environmental reasons and making sure that we have sufficient farmland in our region, so that way we can address various agricultural needs. So that's sort of my viewpoint when it comes to the urban growth boundary and how we should approach it. I think we need to keep it where it's at and try to infill and develop the land that we have available, and if needed, if we can't address housing supply needs and so on, then we need to work with Metro and other neighboring jurisdictions to see what the best route forward is there.
The housing planning, are you trying for diversity, like some places like in Beaverton, they're trying to put some low-income housing into Cooper Mountain? Are you trying to introduce some lower and affordable housing into the neighborhoods that are otherwise higher end?
Yeah, I support having a diverse housing options throughout Tigard. I think it's really important that we don't have gentrified neighborhoods, if you will. It's important to make sure that there's sort of that equity lens when it comes to housing development, making sure that some areas that everybody has access to everything. We're not just pushing a whole bunch of affordable housing into one side of town and just leaving it there. One of the big things that constituents have mentioned to me when it comes to housing development is not just making sure that we have more housing units, which of course we need, but we're looking at the livability side of it as well, making sure that we have access to different modes of transportation, whether it's walking, biking, driving by car, as well as access to green areas. We're in Universal Plaza now. We have a lot of really great parks, making sure we're developing green areas so that way if you are in a higher density area, you still have green spaces to go to with your family. So there's a lot of considerations there.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I know that was something that spaces while you're trying to build homes and businesses.
Yeah.
So one other question related to that I didn't ask you as part of this. Transportation, the traffic in Tigard is horrible just to go through here on the way to work. And how much can the city actually do? I know you have to work with the county and you have to work with ODOT. How much can you do as a city?
Yeah, I think first of all, it is important to recognize that major roads like I-5 and 99W, a lot of those are out of Tigard's control, but there are some things we can do. One of the biggest things that we're working on right now, is one of our top policy priorities, is a jurisdictional transfer for Hall Boulevard. Currently that is owned by the state of Oregon, it's a state highway, and what we're working on right now is trying to bring that into local control, so that way the city of Tigard owns it, so that way we can maintain it and make sure it's meeting community needs where it's at. Right now, since it's just one road on the portfolio of roads that Tigard has but Oregon has to manage right now, it's fallen into a bit of a state of disrepair. So our team's been working very hard on that. There was a joint committee in the state legislature that was formed specifically for the purpose of trying to transfer state highways to local control, and I'm very proud to say that State Representative Ben Bowman's been working very hard and got approval by that committee for the jurisdictional transfer of Hall Boulevard. It still needs to be approved by the full state legislature, but there's been some really good progress there. So that's an example of ways we can help alleviate traffic. On the residential side, we can implement a number of traffic calming measures as well, but I think that's going to be important.
Okay, and thank you for answering that. And the last question, how do you plan to work to further encourage community engagement and involvement in all the processes like library, housing, businesses, urban development? What's your plan for community engagement?
Absolutely. I think we need to be very accessible and open with our community members. Of course, at the end of the day, we're here to serve the community. We're not here to just do what we want and see what the community wants. We need to make sure that we're being responsive to the community and its needs. As a budget committee member, one of the things that I supported was bringing in an external consulting firm to do an audit of the city's engagement and outreach efforts, specifically through an equity lens, because sort of going back to what I said about housing, there isn't a one-size-fits-all way that you can reach out to people. You need to go meet people where they are. Different people will have different barriers in terms of accessibility to reaching out to people. So that's one thing that's that I supported as a budget committee member, and that we're getting underway currently in order to figure out what gaps do we currently have with our engagement and outreach efforts, and how can we improve it. Another thing that I'm really excited about from the last budget cycle is we're expanding our bilingual incentive programs. That way we are hiring folks at the city of Tigard, or incentivizing the hiring of people in the city of Tigard who are able to speak different languages. That way language is not a barrier for folks who are trying to access city services or engage with city personnel. And one of the things that I've found very useful as an elected official is getting out of City Hall and coming and meeting community members where they're at. I try to attend various Tigard events, that way I can meet different community members and learn their perspectives. One of the most formative opportunities I had as a city councilor so far was taking part in National Night Out. There's an opportunity for me and my city council colleagues to go around with the Tigard Police Department and Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue to a bunch of different community parties and barbecues, all on the same night, all across town, and go meet people, have some good food, and talk about what their top concerns are, in addition to public safety and emergency preparedness. As a city councilor who I think was 5 weeks on the job at that point, that was really informative, and that's something I hope to continue doing if I'm reelected.
So one more last point on that, and then we'll go to wrap up. Do you have any specific plans for actually sitting down with people at a community forum, or ongoing plans to actually, get people together and just sit down and have a casual talk?
Yeah, anyone can reach out to me. My contact information is on the website. I'm happy to meet with anyone and talk about concerns that are top of mind. We also have a number of public events that facilitate that as well. I've gone along with the mayor to some meetup with the mayor events that are at local parks as well, which is really great because you hear all these different perspectives that I normally wouldn't hear in the sort of my day-to-day course of life, and different concerns raise those to my attention. And then our city teammates also are very good at bringing up different workshops. For instance, we have a number of workshops coming up this month related to traffic concerns and sort of understanding where should we put speed bumps in here and different traffic calming measures in. So that way it's responsive again to the needs of the community rather than us just saying this is what we want to do, hearing what from the community, what do they need in order to feel more safe when being a pedestrian or driving throughout Tigard. So I'm totally accessible for coffee chat and chatting with people as a city councilor, in addition to joining people at existing events and just sort of learning their perspectives firsthand.
I think that's a good example about your specific concern with the speed bumps and community safety. Okay, to wrap up, a couple of takeaways you want people to have, maybe a minute or two telling people what you want them to take away and why would you like their vote?
Yes, of course. Would you like me to look in the camera here? Well, I think it's there are going to be a lot of tough decisions that people have to make on November 5th this year. And while there are a lot of very big offices on the ballot, I really encourage our community members to take a close look at local elections that will be affecting your day of life much more directly than maybe some higher up offices that we have. City Council is a really important position. We have a lot of city councilors who are council seats that are up on the ballot currently, a number of 4-year terms and a number of 2-year terms because of our expanded council. So I really encourage that if you are a Tigard resident, to please be educated. Make sure you are registered to vote by October 15th and make sure to vote by November 5th. As far as my candidacy, like I said at the beginning, my goal is to make Tigard a great place to run your business, walk your dog, and raise your kids. I want to make sure that Tigard is a safe, dynamic community where everyone can put down roots. And what I think we need in order to do that is a practical and inclusive approach to leadership in Tigard, making sure that we're focused on key priorities like safe streets, secure neighborhoods, and addressing housing needs, as I mentioned earlier, and really making sure that we're listening to you, our Tigard residents, so that way we're responsive to your needs and making this a great place, like I said, to run your business, walk your dog, or raise your kids. My name is Jake Schlack. I'm a 2-term budget committee chair. I'm a current city councilor, and I hope to have your vote in November. Thank you.
Thanks, Jake, and please remember to get out and vote.
Yes.